Royal Guard takes the Queen Consort to court for 100 million crowns, the explosive allegations that shocked the realm. I have been a clerk of the Registry for 19 years, and in that time I have taken in perhaps 40,000 documents, wills, writs, petitions from men who believe the moon is theirs by inheritance. I stamp them, I number them, I put them in the queue, and I go home. The paper is not my business. The order of the paper is my business. So when a guardsman in the red tunic of the household foot came to my window at 11 minutes past 9 on a wet morning in the second week of Lent term, I did not look up. "Filing," I said. "Filing," he said. He slid a folder across the brass. It was a plain gray folder, tied with the kind of tape a man buys from a stationer's for 6 pennies, and the writ inside it was written out by hand in an engineer's block capitals, because he could not afford a typing agency. I read the first line, which is all a clerk ever reads. In the High Court of Chancery at the ALDNHALL, between Corwin Ash, Lance Sergeant, His Majesty's Household Foot Guards, suing on behalf of himself and of all other beneficiaries of the Old Colors Fund, plaintiff, and Her Majesty MORWNA, Queen Consort of Eldermoor, patron of the said fund, defendant. I read the second line, which no clerk ever reads, because by then my hands had gone cold. The plaintiff claims the sum of 100 million crowns. I looked up. He was a big man gone lean, the way career guardsmen go lean, with a face that had spent 11 years being looked at by strangers and had learned to give them nothing back. Boots wet. He had walked. The tram from the depot to the Aldenhall is 3 crowns, and he had spent his last coins on the fee. "Sergeant," I said, and I heard my own voice come out very careful, "do you understand what this document is?" "It's a writ, madam." "It is a writ against the Queen Consort." "Yes." "For 100 million crowns." "For 100 million and change," he said. I rounded down. The change is disputed, and I did not want to be caught out on it. There was no swagger in him. A man walking into the Aldenhall to sue the second person in the realm ought to be lit up like a torch, either furious or drunk or mad, one of the 3. He was none of the 3. He stood at my window with his cap under his arm, and he waited, exactly the way he waited at the palace gate, where standing still is the whole of the job. "The fee," I said, "on a claim of that value is 460 crowns." "Yes, madam." He put a purse on the brass, and out of the purse came the fee. Not notes, but coins, and among the coins were the sort of things that get thrown into a collection tin at the back of a barracks: a cap badge, an old shilling, a folded paper on which somebody had written from the Widow Pell, 2 crowns, all I have. He had brought a receipt for every piece of it, ruled in columns. He counted the money onto my counter and then stood back and let me count it again. 460 crowns exactly. I stamped the writ. It is a very ordinary sound. It happens 200 times a day in that room. And when I lifted the stamp, there was a mark on the paper that said the High Court of Chancery had received a claim. And once that mark is on the paper, the machine of the realm has to move, whoever is standing on the other end of it. I numbered it, Chancery 1188 of that year. "Sergeant Ash," I said, "you are going to want a lawyer." "I have written to 14, he said. "Thank you, madam." And he put his cap on and went back out into the rain, and I sat at my window for a long while with the writ under my hand and my heart going like a bird in a box, because I knew, the way you know a storm from the smell of the air, before there is any cloud in it at all, that the ordinary morning was over, and that it would not come back. He had not been born a lawyer, and he never pretended to be one. What he had been before he ever stood at a gate was a boy who could add. His father, Guardsman Corwin Ash, served 22 years in the regiment and died in his 53rd year of a lung that had been going wrong since a winter on the outer wall at Harrogate in a coat too thin for it. The Old Colors Fund buried him. It was founded 91 years ago, after the Marrow Pass campaign, when 140 guardsmen died in a week, and the realm discovered it had no arrangement whatsoever for their families, and a company of shamed and furious officers drew a deed of trust so that the realm would never discover it again. Every guardsman pays into it out of his wages 9 crowns a month, whether he likes it or not, and in return his widow has a pension, his children have their schooling, and if he is broken in service the fund keeps him. 91 years of 9 crowns a month from every man in the household regiments makes a great deal of money. By the year of the writ, the fund's published accounts showed assets of 104,600,000 crowns. His mother, Marion, drew her widow's pension of 41 crowns a week for 11 years. In the 12th, it became 32. In the 13th, it became 26, and a letter came with it, over the signature of the warden, explaining that the fund's investments had met *A period of exceptional market difficulty, and that all beneficiaries were asked to bear a temporary adjustment in a spirit of shared sacrifice. Corwin Ash bore it. She sold the piano. She sold her husband's medals and did not tell her son for 2 years, and when he found out he bought them back at a loss he could not afford and never said a word to her about the price. In the 14th year the pension fell to 19 crowns, and the letter said the same thing in the same words, and Corwin Ash gave up her cottage at Little Marrow for 2 rooms above a wheelwright's. And it was while carrying the boxes up those stairs that her son sat down on a tea chest with the annual statement of the fund in his hand, and read it properly for the first time. Here is the part the realm has never entirely understood, and that Sir Pelin Vaughan spent 4 days of a trial trying to make sound sinister. Corwin Ash could read a ledger. Before he ever went to the gate he had spent 2 years as a junior in the household pay office, because he was a guardsman with a head for figures, and the army finds those out and uses them. 2 years of chasing 4-crown discrepancies through 5 books, 2 years of an old paymaster named Grissom saying, "Money is not a ghost, boy, it does not evaporate, it walks, so find the footprints." He had hated it and begged to go back to the gate, and stood at that gate for 11 years believing he had left the ledgers behind him. And then he sat on a tea chest in 2 rented rooms with his mother's letter in one hand and the fund's accounts in the other. And the account said 104 million crowns, and the letter said there was no money for 19 crowns a week. And Corwin Ash understood, in about the time it takes to boil a kettle, that one of those 2 documents was a lie. It took him 19 months to find out which. He did it on his rest days, on his half-nights, in the 2 hours between coming off the gate and falling asleep on his cot, without a single accomplice, and without breaking a single lock. That last is the thing the consort's counsel could never explain away. Every document Ash relied upon was public. The fund's accounts are public, by the deed. They are printed every year and posted in every guardroom in the realm under glass, where nobody looks at them. The Registry of Companies is public. Anybody may pay 4 crowns and read who owns what. The auction catalogues are public, and so are the sale results. The Court Gazette is public. Every appointment, every patronage, every trusteeship in a column nobody reads. Ash read all of them, and he filled 14 hard-backed notebooks, numbered and cross-referenced, and every entry carried a citation to a public document with a page and a line. What the notebook said was this: 11 years earlier, the old Colors Fund had been what it had been for 80 years, a dull, cautious, magnificently boring thing, invested in the realm's bonds and in farmland, run by 3 trustees who were all old guardsmen, and one of whom was 90 and deaf. It returned 4% a year, and it had never lost a crown. Then the fund got a new patron. The patronage was a ceremonial gift, handed to the new Queen Consort 3 months after her marriage, because somebody in the household thought a widow's fund a graceful thing for a consort to be seen at. The Gazette entry was 2 lines long. A patron cannot touch the money. A patron opens a bazaar once a year and is photographed with a plaque. 4 months later, the deaf trustee died. 6 months after that, the second trustee, a plain man named Cobb, resigned, citing his health, and a year afterwards bought a house no trustee of a widow's fund could afford. The Gazette printed the new appointments. Sir Holly's Grain, warden, 2 new trustees, both gentlemen of the consort's office, and as trustee asterisk ex officio, by an old rule nobody had thought about in 40 years, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince Rowan. And then, in a single line of the fund's own published minutes, the trustees resolved to seek a modern and diversified return on the fund's capital asterisk, and moved 101 million crowns of the widow's money out of the realm's bonds and into a private investment partnership called the Ardent Rise. Ash paid his 4 crowns at the Registry of Companies and asked who owned the Ardent Rise. The Ardent Rise was owned by Kestrel Holdings. Kestrel Holdings was owned by a partnership of 2 names, one a firm of art dealers called Vellum and Crane, and the other a company so recently made that its ink was barely dry, and that company's sole director, signing in a long looping hand on a form that anybody might pay 4 crowns to see, was Lord Cassius, the Queen Consort's son. I did not know any of that on the morning of the writ. Nobody did. What the Registry knew by noon was that a serving guardsman had sued the Queen Consort for 100 million crowns, and the fact went up through the Aldenhall like fire in a chimney. By 1 o'clock, the Master of the Rolls had sent down for the file. By 2, a gentleman I had never seen before was standing at my window in a very good coat, asking me, pleasantly, whether the filing might be asterisk reviewed for regularity, whether a writ so plainly defective might not simply be set aside by the Registry without troubling anyone. I said that the Registry does not set writs aside. The Registry receives them. He smiled and said he was sure I would want to be helpful. I said the number was Chancery 1188, and that it could now be found in the day book, in the ledger, in the cause list, and in a duplicate that goes every evening to the public record, 4 places, sir, and I would need to be a very industrious woman to be helpful in all 4 of them. He stopped smiling. He was not the last of them. Over the following weeks I was offered, in this order, a transfer to a better department, a word in the right ear about my son's application to the Custom House, and when neither worked, a suggestion, made kindly, by a man with a soft voice, that a clerk of 19 years' standing might find her pension arrangements reviewed if she were thought to be taking a side. I did not take a side. I took the Registry's side, which is that when a man pays his fee his cause goes in the list, and it is heard, and nobody gets to reach into the machine and lift a piece of paper out of it. The machine, once it is fed, is very stupid and very patient and cannot be frightened. They came for Ash first, of course, and they came fast. He was on the 8 o'clock relief at the North Gate 2 mornings after the filing when a runner told him to report to Major Erskine Doro at once, and Ash said, "After my relief, sir," and stood his 2 hours out with his rifle at the order, because the gate is not left empty for anybody, and then he marched himself in. Doro had the writ on his desk, a copy, which had reached him before it reached the consort's solicitors, and that tells you something about how the realm's information runs. "What," said Doro, "in the name of God is this?" "A claim, sir." "Against the asterisk Queen Consort." "Against the patron of the Old Colors Fund, sir. I've sued her in that capacity. I have not sued the Crown." "Do you imagine that distinction will survive contact with anybody at all?" "It's the distinction the deed makes, sir. I'm bound by the deed, so is she." Doro was a good officer and no coward, and he said so to the court later, under oath, at some cost to himself. But he was also a man with 30 years in, and a wife, and a house. "Withdraw it." "No, sir." "Ash," Doro put both hands flat on the desk, "I carried your father's coffin. I am telling you as a friend, withdraw it, and I will bury the paperwork so deep that in 6 months nobody will remember your name." "My mother gets 19 crowns a week," Ash said. Mrs. Callow at Little Marrow gets 14 and has sold her stove. There are 1,100 widows on that roll, sir, and every one of them has been told there is no money, and there is asterisk money. There's 100 million crowns of it, and it's ours, and I know where it went. I'm not able to withdraw it, sir. I've looked a long time for a way to be able to, and there isn't one." Doro looked at him for a while. Then he said, very quietly, "God help you, Sergeant," and reached for the form that suspends a man from duty. The suspension came down that afternoon, pending review of conduct incompatible with service. Pay stopped. Quarters vacated within 7 days. Rifle, tunic, bearskin, gloves, and cap all to be surrendered to the quartermaster. And Ash surrendered them, folded, pressed, and in better condition than the day they had been issued to him, and signed the form and asked for a receipt. They gave him a receipt. He kept it. It is in the trial bundle at tab 4, and when Anise Dre put it up on the screen 11 months later, she did not say a word about it for a long moment, and she did not need to. He walked out of the depot in a borrowed coat with 14 notebooks in a canvas bag, and slept that night on his mother's floor. And in the morning he put on the only suit he owned, which had been his father's, and went out to find a lawyer. He had already written to 14. Over the next month he wrote to 61 more. Every chambers in the realm has a rule. A barrister must take the next case that comes to him, if the fee is proper and the work is in his line. They call it the rank rule after the cab rank, where the first cab takes the first fare and no cabman picks his passenger. It is the reason a hated man may still be defended. The rank rule broke for Corwin Ash like a stick across a knee. 61 refusals, all polite, all different, all meaning one thing. A conflict of interest, regrettably at capacity, outside the scope of my practice. One senior silk wrote back a single line, "Sergeant, you are asking me to end my career for 100 million crowns that will never be yours," which at least had the merit of honesty, and which Ash filed in his notebook with the rest, because he kept everything in order. He came to the registry once a week in that period to file his own applications, in block capitals, on paper he had bought himself. I watched him get thinner. I watched the suit go shiny at the elbows. I watched the newspapers, which had first printed his name in a tone of scandalized delight, change key. The guardsman's grudge asterisk, one called it, a soldier's fantasy, and there was a cartoon which I will not describe, and about which he never said a word to anyone. And in the 8th week, the consort's lawyers filed their answer to Chancery 1188, and it was not an answer at all. It was an application to strike the claim out, and it ran to 90 pages. It said, in short, this man cannot sue. He is not a trustee. He is not the attorney of the realm. He is a private soldier, and a beneficiary of a trust has no right to sue in his own name for the whole of it. Only the trustees may sue, and the trustees do not wish to. And in any case the Queen Consort, as patron, holds no property of the fund and owes no duty to it. And in any case a serving member of the household may not litigate against a member of the royal house without leave of the Lord Chamberlain, which is refused. And in any case, and in any case, and in any case. 90 pages, signed by Sir Pelham Vaughan, King's Counsel, who had not lost a contested application in 11 years. And at the bottom of them a cost schedule, because if the claim was struck out the plaintiff would pay the consort's costs, and the costs were estimated at 340,000 crowns. Which is a way of saying, withdraw, or we will take everything you will ever earn, and your mother's 19 crowns a week besides, and we will do it lawfully in open court. The hearing of the strikeout was listed for the first Tuesday in Easter term, before Lord Justice Ansel Rooke. Corwin Ash filed his response 9 days later. It was 6 pages long. He had written it himself at his mother's kitchen table, and he had cited one document only, and I remember reading it at my window and setting down my tea very slowly, because in 19 years of taking in paper I had never before had the feeling, quite physically, in the arms, that the thing on the counter in front of me was going to go off like a shell. The document was the deed of trust of the Old Colors Fund. Not the printed copy in the guardroom, the original. And Clause 9 of it, which had not been read aloud in a court of the realm in 91 years, said this: And FORSMUCH, as this fund is the property of no man and of every man who has borne the color, it is declared that any beneficiary hereof, being a guardsman serving or discharged, or the widow or the child of such, may sue in his own name, and in the name of all for the whole of the fund and for every crown of it, against any person whatsoever who shall have taken it, whether he be a trustee, a warden, a patron, or a prince. And no want of standing, no rule of court, and no license withheld shall bar him. This right shall be called the right of the color, and it shall not be taken away. I went to the strikeout. I had no business being there. I told the chief clerk I was checking a listing error and went and stood at the back of Court 1, and I was not the only clerk who had suddenly found an errand in it that morning. Court 1 holds 211 people. There were 300 in it in the aisles on the window ledges. Half were newspapermen. The other half were guardsmen off duty in civilian coats, sitting very straight in rows, saying nothing, and the ushers did not dare tell them to move. Sir Pelin Vaughan came in with 4 juniors, 2 solicitors, and a trolley of documents, and he was, I will say it, magnificent. Silver, unhurried, a voice like a cello. At the other end of the row, alone, with a bundle he had tied himself in his father's suit, stood Lance Sergeant Corwin Ash. No wig, no gown, a litigant in person, which is the loneliest thing a man can be. Lord Justice Rooke came in. We stood, we sat. Sergeant Ash, Rooke said, you are unrepresented. Yes, my lord. Have you sought representation? 75 times, my lord. Rooke's pen stopped moving. He was a dry, careful, unlovable judge, 22 years on that bench, with a reputation for treating every advocate before him with the same distant, immaculate contempt. 75, he repeated. Yes, my lord. I have the letters if the court wants them. Sir Pelin, said Rooke, without looking away from Ash, does anything occur to you about that number? My lord, the choices of the independent bar are entirely a matter for the independent bar. Quite, said Rooke, quite so, and he wrote something down. They argued for 4 hours. Vaughan was very good and Ash was not good at all. He had no advocacy in him, no phrases. He stood in his shiny suit and read out what he had written in block capitals, and when Vaughan interrupted him, elegantly, 11 times Ash waited until he had finished, and then went on from the word where he had been stopped. That was his whole art. He could not be knocked out of his place. Vaughan's argument was a beautiful building. A beneficiary has no standing. The deed is a curiosity of another age, drafted by soldiers, not lawyers. Clause 9 is 91-year-old rhetoric, void for uncertainty, repealed by the Modern Trusts Act, and in any event no concern of a patron who holds nothing and signs nothing. And Ash, when his turn came, said, My lord, the Trusts Act preserves rights expressly conferred by a deed made before it. This deed expressly confers this one. It says it shall not be taken away. Sir Pelin says the words are too old to mean anything. They meant something to the men who wrote them, my lord. They had just buried 140 of their own and watched the widows go to the poorhouse, and they wrote Clause 9 so that if it ever happened again a man in the ranks would not have to ask anybody's permission to stop it. It isn't rhetoric. It's a door. They left the key in it on purpose, and I'm the first man in 91 years who's needed to use it. There was a silence in court, one of a kind I have not heard before or since. Not a hush, a hollow. Rooke said, Sir Pelin, is the fund's deed of trust before me? The certified copy is at tab 11, my lord. I don't want the certified copy, said Rooke. I want the deed, the engrossed original. Have it lodged in the court strongroom by Friday. And that is the moment the whole thing turned, because Vaughan's face did something for about 1/5 of a second that I have never forgotten. It was not fear. It was the look of a man who has just realized that somewhere behind him, somebody has been doing something extremely stupid. Rook reserved his judgment for 3 weeks. When it came, it dismissed the strikeout in every particular, and its final paragraph has been printed in every law report in the realm. The defendant says that the plaintiff is a private soldier, and that a private soldier has no business in this court. The deed says otherwise. The deed says that any man who has borne the color may sue for the whole of the fund against a trustee, a warden, a patron, or a prince. It is not for me to be embarrassed by the plainness of an old man's drafting. The words are plain. They will be given their plain effect. The claim will proceed to trial. The consort solicitors appealed. The appeal was refused in 6 weeks. And on the day it was refused, a young woman in a coat 2 seasons old walked up to Corwin Ash on the steps of the Alden Hall in front of 40 photographers and said, loudly enough to be heard, "Sergeant, my name is Inez Dre. I am 2 years called. I have no practice worth ruining, and I would like to be your counsel." Most of what the realm now believes about Inez Dre is nonsense. She was not a crusader. She was 29 and very tired, 2 years at the bar in a set that gave her the cases nobody else wanted: small frauds, bad debts, the dull grinding end of the money courts. And she had spent those 2 years learning in tremendous detail exactly how a man hides a crown behind a company. That is what she brought, not fire, technique. She took the brief for a fee of 1 crown and made Ash pay it in coin and wrote him a receipt. Because, she said, an unpaid barrister is a friend and a paid barrister is an officer of the court. Her head of chambers had her out of her room within a fortnight. Nothing so vulgar as a letter. The rent on her desk was revised. Her clerk stopped putting work in her diary. And by the end of the month, Inez Dre was practicing from the back bedroom of her aunt's house, with the papers of the largest civil claim in the history of the realm stacked on a card table. They lived, the 2 of them, on nothing for a year, and the regiment fed them. Nobody printed that at the time, and I want it in the record. Every Friday for 11 months, an envelope came to the wheelwright's house with no letter in it, and 30 or 40 crowns of a private soldier's pay, from men who would have been charged with insubordination if their names had been on it. 60 crowns from a mess in the north, 11 from a farrier, 2 from the widow Pell, who had already given him everything she had and found 2 more crowns somewhere. Ash entered every one of them in a ruled book, and at the end he published the book and had it audited, and there was not a crown out of place. Now I must tell you what Inez Dre and Corwin Ash actually proved, because the newspapers never printed the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is the whole thing. It was never complicated. It was only hidden behind enough companies that nobody had walked the path. 101 million crowns of widows' money went into the Ardent Rise partnership. The Ardent Rise did not invest it. It had no offices, no staff, and no telephone. Its registered address was a room over a chandler's shop, let for 4 crowns a week to a company secretary named Vellum, who was one half of the art dealers Vellum and Crane, who sat on the boards of 6 of the 11 companies in the chain, and who sold to the Ardent Rise over 11 years. A collection of miniatures, 9 million crowns. A set of tapestries described in the invoice as asterisk of the Marrow School, attributed asterisk 14 million, 41 paintings, 31 million, and a quantity of asterisk decorative stone, 6 million. 60 million crowns of art and stone, bought by a widow's pension fund, from a dealer who sat on its own board. And where was the art? Ash answered that the way old Grissom had taught him, money is not a ghost. It walks, find the footprints. The footprints were in the auction catalogs. The miniatures had been bought by Vellum and Crane at public auction for 1,100,000 crowns and sold to the Widows' Fund 3 weeks later for 9 million. The tapestries of the Marrow School attributed asterisk had come out of a country sale, in a lot that included 2 carpets and a broken clock, for 4,000 crowns. And the 41 paintings had never moved at all. Never crated, never shipped, never insured in transit, because they had never left the walls they hung on, and those walls were the walls of Renfell, the Queen Consort's private house. Ash could prove it, because Renfell opens to the public for 11 days every summer to raise money for a hospice, and there is a guidebook, illustrated, reprinted every year for 30 years. He bought all 30, 2 crowns each from a stall. He laid them out on his mother's kitchen table, the long gallery in the year before the sale and the long gallery in the year after, and the paintings were in the same places, in the same frames, under the same little brass lamps. And the only difference was that in the second one they belonged to 1,100 widows, and nobody had told the widows about it. The asterisk decorative stone, at 6 million crowns, was the new roof of the east wing of Renfell. The invoices were addressed to the Ardent Rise. The stonemason's firm had gone under 2 years later, and its records had gone to the Registry in 17 crates, where anybody, for 4 crowns, might have read them, and where nobody ever had, until a suspended lance sergeant sat in a cold basement for 6 Saturdays and read all 17. That is the case. 60 million crowns in art and stone, most of it already hanging on her walls. 22 million in management and advisory fees, paid to companies whose sole director was her son. 11 million in asterisk charitable and ceremonial disbursements that went into the accounts of the consort's office. 4 million in costs of establishment asterisk. 2 million that simply stopped being written down. When Ash filed his writ, the Old Colors Fund, the fund that buried his father, the fund that 1,100 widows lived on, held 8,200,000 crowns, and was scheduled by its own actuary to be unable to pay a single pension within 4 years. There is one more thing in the arithmetic, and it is the thing that mattered most in the end. The fund's published accounts still said 104 million. They had said it every year for 11 years, in a printed statement, posted under glass in every guardroom in the realm, signed by the warden, Sir Holly's Grain, and countersigned, as the deed requires, by the trustee asterisk ex officio. By the Crown Prince. Rowan's signature, 11 times on 11 statements, each one certifying to 1,100 widows and to 11,000 serving guardsmen that their money was where it was supposed to be. That, said Inez Dre at the trial, in a voice so quiet that the men on the window ledges leaned forward, is not an accounting error. An accounting error is a mistake. This is a asterisk sentence, written down 11 times, in the certain knowledge that 1,100 women would read it and believe it and go on eating less. But I am running ahead of myself, and I have not told you about the 11 months between the appeal and the trial, which is where they very nearly killed it. They did not kill it with argument. They tried argument once at the strikeout, and Rook cut them in half. After that they stopped arguing and started asterisk grinding, and grinding is the thing that beats poor litigants. Item: the consort's solicitors served a request for further and better particulars running to 406 numbered questions, each requiring a documented answer, with a 14-day deadline. It cost Ash and Inez Dre 9 weeks. They answered everyone, and the covering letter said, "We have answered all 406. We look forward to yours." Item: they then applied to strike the claim out again, on the ground that the answers were inadequate. Rook refused it and made them pay the costs, the first crown Ash's side ever received, which Inez spent that afternoon on a second-hand photocopier. Item: every document Ash asked for, they resisted. The fund's board minutes, withheld, ordered, produced 10 months later with 60% of the text blacked out, challenged, unredacted, and behind the black ink there was nothing confidential at all, only the minute of the meeting at which the trustees voted themselves their fees. Item: Sir Holly's Grain, warden of the fund, went abroad for his health and could not, unfortunately, be reached. Item: Corwin Ash's conduct review, pending for 11 months, resolved itself 4 weeks before trial into a charge. Not a service charge. A criminal charge, theft of the property of the Old Colors Fund, to wit, 14 notebooks, 17 crates of a bankrupt stonemason's invoices, and 30 guidebooks to Renfell House. They did not expect to convict him. They expected to hang the word thief round his neck 4 weeks before he walked into court one, and let Sir Pelham Vaughan do the rest. It was Inez who saved him, in about 90 seconds, in a magistrate's court on a Tuesday morning. Whose property is a guidebook my client bought at a stall for 2 crowns. The prosecutor looked at his papers. And whose property, said Inez, are the invoices of a bankrupt firm lodged in a public registry which the public may inspect for 4 crowns and which my client inspected for 4 crowns, and here is his receipt, and here is the register signed in his own name on each of 6 Saturdays. He didn't take them. He read them. In the reading room, where the sign on the door says reading room. She set the receipt down. The Crown's case is that a man committed theft by going to a library. The charge was thrown out before lunch, but it did what it was sent to do, because for 4 weeks every newspaper carried the word charged under Corwin Ash's photograph, and only 3 carried the word dismissed . And that is grinding, not a villain twirling a mustache, a diary, a deadline, a cost schedule, and 100 honest-looking men doing small, ordinary, deniable things, each of which is nothing, and all of which together are a wall. He nearly went under twice. The first time was in the 9th month, and it was money. His mother took a fall on the wheelwright stairs and broke a hip. The surgeon's fee was 200 crowns, and Corwin Ash did the arithmetic he had been avoiding for a year, and there was no arithmetic. There was nothing. He had a suit, a canvas bag, 14 notebooks, and a barrister living on her aunt's charity. A nurse said afterwards that he stood at the ward window for 2 hours, perfectly still, and that she had taken him at first for a statue somebody had put there. Then he went out and sold his father's medals for the 2nd time in his life, and paid the surgeon, and went back to work. The 2nd time he nearly went under was worse, because it was not money, it was hope. 6 weeks before trial, the consort's side offered to settle. Not a fraction, everything. 100 million crowns, paid into the Old Colors Fund within 30 days. Every widow's pension restored to the old rate and back paid for 11 years with interest. Renfell House to be charged as security. Sergeant Ash's suspension lifted, his record expunged, his rank restored, and in a paragraph I read 4 times before I believed it, his promotion to color sergeant with immediate effect and a posting of his choosing. His mother's cottage at Little Marrow bought back and put in her name. Inez Dre's costs paid in full. 3 conditions: no admission of liability, the court record sealed, and the parties to make no statement ever about the facts of the case, on pain of the whole sum falling to be repaid. That is the offer in full. Sir Pelham Vaughan drafted it, and it is the finest thing he ever wrote, and it very nearly worked, and I have thought about it more than any paper that ever crossed my counter, because, and this is the thing nobody wants to hear, it was the right offer. The widows get everything back paid, secured. The fund is whole again. The sergeant gets his uniform back. His mother gets her garden, and it costs nothing but silence. And silence, weighed against 1,100 women eating less. What is a record against a stove that works? Inez Dre brought the offer to the wheelwright's house at 9 o'clock at night and put it on the kitchen table, and she said, because she was an officer of the court and it was her duty to say it, "Sergeant, my advice is that you accept. It is more than we can win. If we go to trial we may lose, and if we lose you will be bankrupt for the rest of your life and the widows get nothing. My advice is to take it." Ash sat for a long time. Then he said, "It's not my money." "It's not their money either," said Inez. "It's the fund's. That's Clause 9, that's the asterisk whole point of Clause 9, you sue for them, you don't sue for you. Yes, said Ash, for them so they should say. And that is how, on a wet Saturday, in a parish hall at Little Marrow with a leaking roof, a lance sergeant of the household foot guards put the largest settlement offer in the legal history of the realm to a vote of 240 widows. I was there. I sat at the back with my hat in my lap. He read the offer out in full, every clause, including the one about silence, and he did not summarize it, and he did not sell it, and he did not tell them what he wanted. Then he read the alternative, which he had also written out in block capitals. We may lose. If we lose, we get nothing, and the fund is broken within 4 years, and there is no second chance because there is no second man who will do this. Then he sat down on the edge of the stage and waited. There was a long argument, and it was not noble. It was 240 poor women arguing about money. Some were frightened. Some were angry with him. One woman stood up with her voice shaking and said that her son needed a school place, and she did not care 1 crown for the asterisk record, and she would like her money now, please, and sat down and cried, and nobody blamed her for it. And then Hesper Callow got up. Mrs. Callow was 78. Her husband had been a color sergeant and had lost a hand at Marrow Pass, and she had sold her stove the winter before because the pension would not carry both the stove and the rent. She stood up with 2 hands on the chair in front of her, and she said, "How much do we get if we say yes?" "Everything," said Ash. "Every crown you were owed back to the beginning." "And what do they get?" "They get to say it never happened." Mrs. Callow thought about that. "My husband," she said, "came back from Marrow Pass with 1 hand, and he stood at the gate for 19 years with 1 hand, and when they finally sent him home he said to me, 'Hesper, the whole of it was one thing. It was asterisk being seen doing it right asterisk. That's the job. Anybody can stand still in the dark.'" She looked around the hall. "They want to give us our money and take the seeing. They want to pay us to say the men were never robbed. Well, I have gone cold before, and I dare say I can go cold again. But I am not going to be asterisk paid to say my husband was never robbed." She sat down. They voted. The ballot went round on scraps of paper torn out of the back of a hymn book, and I counted it myself because they asked the clerk to do it, and the count was: refuse the offer, 198. Accept 39. Spoiled 3. And Corwin Ash stood up on the edge of that stage and said, "Thank you," and nothing else, and went out to the porch and stood in the rain for a while by himself. The offer was refused on the Monday. The retaliation began on the Tuesday. I have set out the criminal charge already, but the thing that nearly finished it happened on a Thursday in the last week before trial, and it happened in my part of the Alden Hall, and it is my shame, and I will tell it plainly. The engrossed original of the deed of trust had been lodged in the court strongroom, on Rook's order, 11 months earlier. A great stiff sheet of vellum with 14 signatures and 14 seals on it, in a japanned tin box on the 3rd shelf, signed in and out on a register kept by the chief clerk. On the Thursday, Inez Dre came to inspect it, to check the wording of Clause 9 against the copy in the trial bundle. The box came out, and the vellum was not in it. In it was a certified copy. Very good work. The right paper, the right ribbon, a proper notary seal, dated 11 months earlier, exactly as though it had been the document lodged all along. The register said, in a hand nobody could account for, asterisk deed certified copy lodged, when I had seen the vellum with my own eyes on the day it came in, and touched it. Clause 9 was not in it, not blacked out, not damaged, simply not there. The copy ran Clause 8, Clause 10, and renumbered the rest, so that unless you had the original, or had committed the deed to memory as Corwin Ash had, you would never have known a clause had existed at all. The chief clerk went white and then went to Rook. Rook came down to the strongroom himself in his shirt sleeves, and stood a long time looking at the shelf without saying anything. Then he ordered the strong room sealed, the register impounded, and every clerk in the registry, including me, examined on oath that afternoon. I did not resent it. Somebody with a key had put a forgery into the court's own strong room, and until he knew who, every one of us was a suspect. But Rook said something else in that strong room, in front of 6 clerks and 2 ushers, which has never been printed anywhere. Whoever did this has done me a kindness. A man who steals a document is telling me the document is worth stealing. He put his hands in his pockets. 22 years on that bench, and I have never once known what a case was really about until somebody tried to hide something from me. That night the consort solicitors filed an urgent application. Since the original deed was, regrettably, unavailable, and since the only version now before the court was a duly certified copy containing no Clause 9, the claim had no foundation and must be dismissed forthwith. They filed it at 7 in the evening, which is the hour the registry closes, and which was a mistake, because I was still at my counter, and I read it, and I sat in an empty room with my coat on, and my hands shaking with a rage I had not felt in 19 years. And then I did the only thing a clerk can do. I stamped it and I numbered it, and I put it in the list for hearing before Lord Justice Rooke, at 10 o'clock the next morning in Court 1, with the parties present. Because the machine cannot be frightened, that is all I have ever had to give. Corwin Ash did not sleep that night. Neither did Inez Dre. From 8 in the evening until 4 in the morning they went through the 14 notebooks, page by page, looking for a way to prove the wording of a document that no longer existed. And there wasn't one, because a man's recollection of a clause is not evidence of a clause, and they both knew it. At 4:30 Inez Dre put her head down on the card table and said, "It's over, Sergeant. We can prove every crown of the fraud and we cannot prove we're allowed to say so." And Corwin Ash, who had been sitting perfectly still for 4 hours with notebook 11 open in front of him, said, "Engrossed in triplicate." "What?" "Clause 14, the last clause. This deed is engrossed in triplicate, one part to remain with the trustees, one to be lodged with the court, and one to be laid up with the color." He looked at her. "It's not one deed, it's 3. Inez Dre lifted her head very slowly. "Laid up with the color," she said. "What does that mean? What does it physically mean?" "When a color is retired," said Ash, "it goes into the color chest at the depot chapel. Standards, battle honors, the roll of the dead. The chest is sealed and it's opened once in a generation when there's a new color to lay up, and there hasn't been one for 31 years. He put his hand flat on the notebook. "The deed was made in the year after Marrow Pass. The Marrow color went into that chest the same year. If they laid a copy up with it." "Then it has been sitting in a box in a chapel," said Inez Dre, "for 91 years, and nobody in the consort's office has ever heard of it, because nobody in the consort's office has ever been a guardsman." She looked at him. "Sergeant, who can open that chest?" "3 people," said Ash. "The king, the colonel-in-chief, and the color warden of the regiment, who is the senior surviving color sergeant and who has one of the 2 keys." "And who is the colonel-in-chief?" "Her Royal Highness the Princess Adela," he said, "the king's sister." What was said in the room at Harrogate that morning has never been told, and the 2 people who were in it have both declined, courteously and permanently, to discuss it. What is on the record is this. At 6 in the morning, Inez Dre walked up to the gate of the palace and asked to see the colonel-in-chief of the household foot guards. She was refused. She stayed at the gate. At 7, an equerry came out to move her on, and she handed him a sheet of paper on which she had written 22 words. "Ma'am, the deed of your regiment's widow's fund has been stolen from the king's own court. The 3rd copy is in your chapel." At 8:20, a motor came out of the palace and stopped, and the window came down, and Princess Adela looked at the young woman standing in the road with the papers of the largest civil claim in the history of the realm under her arm, and said, "Get in." At 9, a car went through the gates of the depot. At 9:15, the chapel was opened. At 9:40, a very old man in a wheelchair, blazer, regimental tie, color sergeant stripes stitched to his sleeve 50 years ago, was lifted up the chapel steps by 4 serving guardsmen who had been given no orders and had simply appeared. Sergeant Major Otho Quill, aged 91, color warden of the household foot, took a key from around his neck on a bootlace and put it into the left-hand lock of the color chest, and Princess Adela put hers into the right, and they turned them together, because it takes 2. And under the folded silk of a color that had been carried at Marrow Pass, wrapped in oiled paper, laid flat where they had laid it 91 years ago, was a sheet of vellum with 14 signatures and 14 seals on it. 14 clauses. Clause 9, third from the bottom in a copperplate hand, and it shall be called the right of the color, and it shall not be taken away. Rook had been sitting since 10. Sir Pelham Vaughan had been on his feet 3 minutes, submitting with real regret that the claim must now be dismissed, when the doors at the back of court 1 opened and 400 people turned round at once. There is a photograph. Everybody has seen the photograph, taken by a boy of 19 from a paper nobody had heard of, who had stood on a window ledge for 2 hours because he could not get a seat. It hangs in the Alden Hall to this day. Inez Dray at the front, walking fast, coat flying, carrying nothing. Behind her, 4 guardsmen in shirt sleeves carrying a wheelchair up the aisle with a very old man in it, sitting bolt upright. And on the old man's knees, held flat under both his hands, a sheet of vellum. Sir Pelham Vaughan stopped speaking in the middle of a word. He looked at the vellum, and then he looked, for a long moment, at nothing at all, and a man in the press gallery wrote afterwards that it was the first time in his life he had seen Pelham Vaughan's shoulders come down. Rook said, "Sir Pelham, do you wish to continue with your application?" Vaughan was silent for 4 seconds. I counted them. "My lord," he said, "I do not." "No," said Rook, "I should not have thought so." He looked down the court at the old man in the wheelchair. "Sergeant Major, you are keeping the court's document on your knees. I do not intend to be rude, but I have a strong room for that." Otho Quill lifted his chin. "With respect, my lord," he said, in a voice like a gate on a dry hinge, "I had a look at your strong room in the newspaper. I'll keep hold of it if it's all the same to you until I'm asked for it by a man I've sworn to." And Rook put his pen down and said, "Sergeant Major, that is the most sensible thing that has been said in this court in 11 months. Usher, take a chair to the color warden. He will keep the deed. The trial will begin on Monday. I will not give you the whole of the 6 days. I will give you the 4 things that decided it. The first was Perrin Halloway, and Halloway broke on the 2nd day. He had been the fund's actuary for 19 years, a small, gray, apologetic man who did sums for a living and was very good at them. And he had been dismissed in the 2nd year of the ardent rise with 40,000 crowns and a covenant of confidentiality that ran to 9 pages. For 11 months, he had refused to have anything to do with the case. Inez Dray summoned him anyway. Sir Pelham Vaughan rose at once. Mr. Halloway was bound by a lawful contract and could not be compelled to break it. And Inez Dray said, "My lord, a covenant of confidentiality is a promise not to reveal a secret. It is not, and cannot in any court of this realm be, a promise not to reveal a crime asterisk. If it were, any thief in the kingdom might buy silence with a form of words, and this court would enforce it for him." She turned a page. "The defendant asks your lordship to make the High Court of Chancery an accessory. I invite your lordship to decline." Rook declined. And Perrin Halloway climbed into the box and was asked 1 question, and the answer took 4 hours. He had written a memorandum in the 2nd year. He had done the sums on the ardent rise and seen in about a week what a lance sergeant would later take 19 months to see, and he had carried it up to the warden's office himself. Sir Holly's Grain read it in front of him. thanked him, and put it in a drawer. And 4 days later, Perrin Holloway was dismissed for a want of confidence in his professional judgment and given 40,000 crowns and 9 pages of silence. "Mr. Holloway," said Anise Dre, "did you keep a copy?" "I am an actuary, madam. I keep a copy of everything." And he took it out of his inside pocket, where it had been for 11 years, and his hands shook so badly that the usher had to take it from him. "Why," said Anise very gently, "did you never speak?" "Because I am not a brave man, and because I have a wife, and they paid me, and I told myself for 11 years that it was somebody else's business. And every year they posted the accounts in the guardrooms, and every year I read them in the newspaper, and I knew what the number should have been." He stopped. "I should like to give the 40,000 crowns back. I have never spent any of it. I couldn't." The second was Lord Cassius, and Lord Cassius destroyed himself, and it took 11 minutes. He came into court on the third day the way a man comes into a room he owns, beautifully dressed, faintly amused, and so certain of the outcome that he had not troubled to prepare. He was the sole director of the company that owned the partnership that had taken 101 million crowns of widow's money, and when Anise Dre put his signature up on the screen, he glanced at it and said, "Yes, that's mine. I sign a great deal. Do you read what you sign, my lord? When it interests me. Did the Ardent Rise partnership interest you?" "Not enormously." "What did the Ardent Rise partnership do, my lord?" "It invested," said Cassius, "in a diversified portfolio of assets." "Name one." A pause. "I'm not a details man." "Name one asset, my lord, of the 101 million crowns worth in the partnership of which you are the sole director." "There were," said Cassius, "paintings." "Where are they?" "In storage." Anise Dre did not move. "Where?" she said. "A repository." "I'd have to check, though." "My lord," said Anise Dre, "I'm going to put 4 photographs on the screen, and I would like you to look at them and nod at your counsel." And up they went, the long gallery at Renfell in the guidebook of the year before the sale, and in the guidebook of the year after, and the same 41 paintings in the same 41 frames under the same 41 little brass lamps. "That is your mother's house. Those are the widow's paintings. They hang in the room where you take your coffee. Do you say the Old Colors Fund paid 31 million crowns to move 41 pictures a distance of no inches at all?" And Lord Cassius looked at the screen for a long moment and said, "I want to consult my counsel." And the whole of Court 1 understood at exactly the same instant that they had won. He lied for another 8 minutes. The paintings were on loan back. There was a document. He was invited to produce it and could not. The asterisk decorative stone was a warehouse, and Anise put up the stonemason's invoice, which described a roof and named the east wing of Renfell in the address line. Then Cassius said the sentence that finished his family. He said, "Look, I signed what the office sent me. I didn't set any of it up. If you want the person who set it up, she is sitting asterisk behind you." And he pointed, in front of 400 people, straight down the length of Court 1 at his mother. But before either of them, they had tried to break Corwin Ash, and that was on the first day. He gave his evidence in the morning, and it was the dullest evidence ever given in that building. He read out figures. He gave document references. When he was asked a question, he answered it and then stopped, which no witness in the history of the law has ever done. He did not once say the word justice asterisk, and he did not say the word asterisk widow except when a widow's name was in the schedule. Then Sir Pelin Vaughan stood up, and he was on his feet for 5 hours. He did not go at the arithmetic. Vaughan had read the notebooks and knew the arithmetic was sound, and so he went at the asterisk man asterisk, because if you cannot break the sums you must break the mouth they come out of. He was courteous throughout, which made it worse. "You were suspended for misconduct, were you not, Sergeant? You were charged with theft 4 weeks ago. Do you say that serving guardsmen have been sending you money in unmarked envelopes? That is a private army, Sergeant, funding a private grudge. Your mother's pension was reduced, was it not? 19 crowns a week, I think. This is about your mother. Isn't it, Sergeant? Say it. This whole prodigious edifice of paper is one man's resentment on behalf of his mother. Ash said yes. Vaughn had his next question halfway out of his mouth. He stopped. I'm sorry. Yes, sir, said Corwin Ash. It's about my mother. It's about Mrs. Callow, who sold her stove, and Mrs. Pell, who gave me 2 crowns and hasn't got 2 crowns. If you're asking me did I go looking because it was my mother, yes. I did. I want that written down, sir, because it's true, and because I've been at pains this whole year not to say one thing in this court that isn't. And Vaughn, who had spent 5 hours building a trap for a proud man, found himself standing in front of an honest one, which is the one thing no cross-examination has ever been designed to defeat. He tried once more. It was late in the afternoon and he was tired, and he did the thing that great advocates do about once in a career. He reached for contempt. Sergeant Ash, he said, let us be clear about who you are. You are a doorman. Your profession consists of standing perfectly still and saying nothing while your betters go in and out. You are not an accountant, you are not a lawyer, you are not a trustee, and you are asking this court to believe that you alone, out of a fund, a warden, 3 trustees, a professional board, and the whole apparatus of the Crown, are the one man who noticed. I will not pretend I remember it as prose. I remember it the way you remember a bell. Corwin Ash stood in that box in his father's suit with his hands at his sides, and he said, Sir, my job is to stand still and look at what comes through a gate, 11 years of it. In the rain, in the cold, in the dark, with people laughing at me and photographing me and putting their hands on me, and the whole of the job, the whole of it, sir, is that you do not move and you do not blink and you do not stop looking. He paused. Everybody else in this business had somewhere else to be. The trustees had their fees, and the warden had his knighthood, and the prince had his signature put in front of him at the end of a long day, and the auditors had 11 other clients, and all of them looked at that fund for about a minute a year and then looked away, and that is exactly how it was done. He turned his head very slightly. You're right that I'm a doorman, sir. It took a doorman. It took the only man in the realm whose entire trade is not looking away. Nobody clapped. It is not that kind of court. But there was a sound in Court 1 that afternoon that I have never heard anywhere else, and it took me a moment to understand what it was. It was 200 men in civilian coats, off-duty guardsmen, sitting in rows at the back, who had said nothing for 4 days, coming to their feet all together without a word. They did not cheer, they just stood. Rook looked at them for a long time. Then he said, The court will rise for the day, which is not a thing a judge says at 4:10, and he went out, and he let them stand. The third was the Crown Prince, and he was not compelled. That is the fact that saved the House of Harrogate, though nobody understood it at the time. Inez Dre had served a summons on him, and it came back within a day, not resisted, not challenged, not smothered in the Lord Chamberlain's office as everybody expected, but endorsed, in ink, in a hand the newspapers printed the next morning across half a front page. I will attend, R. He came on the 5th day in a plain dark suit with one equerry, and took the oath in a voice that did not entirely hold, and Inez Dre, 29, 2 years called, in a gown that had been her aunt's, stood up to question the heir to the throne. She did it in 11 minutes. She had planned it for 11 months. Sir, is that your signature? It is. On 11 annual statements of the Old Colors Fund, each certifying the fund's assets at approximately 104 million crowns. Yes. Were the fund's assets 104 million crowns? No, said the Crown Prince, they were not. Did you know that when you signed? No. How were the statements put before you? And Rowan of Harrogate looked out at 400 people, and did the thing his family had spent 11 months of legal advice begging him not to do. He told the truth. They came in the Friday folder, he said. Every Friday there is a folder perhaps 3 inches thick. Trust accounts, patronages, letters, warrants, everything the household needs signed. It comes from the consort's office, which has managed my correspondence since I was 19. Where I am to sign, there is a ribbon. He stopped. That is the answer, madam. I signed at the ribbon. For 11 years I signed at the ribbon, and I did not read what was above it, and 1,100 women were told by my own name that their money was safe. The room made no noise at all. Sir, said Inez Dre, do you say you were deceived? I say I was used asterisk, said the Crown Prince, and that I made it easy. Those are 2 different wrongs, and only one of them is somebody else's. I have been advised to tell this court that I am a victim. I decline to. A man who signs without reading is not a victim. He is a door that was left open, and I was the door. He looked then down the length of the court at a lance sergeant in a shiny suit. Sergeant Ash has been suspended from my family's service for 13 months for bringing this action. I would like the court to record that he was doing my job. I was the trustee. He was the doorman. He read the papers and I did not. Sir Pelham Vaughan rose to cross-examine, and then, after a moment, sat down again, and did not ask a single question. And I am told that when the trial was over he said to a junior in the robing room that there had been nothing left in the room to ask a question asterisk with asterisk. The 4th was the Queen Consort of Eldermoor, and she was not compelled either. She did not have to give evidence. No defendant does. Vaughan's advice, this came out afterwards, and he did not deny it, was in 3 words, written on the back of a brief and pushed along the row to her solicitor. Do not testify. She testified. I have only ever arrived at one answer, which is that she did not believe, even then, with the vellum on an old man's knees and her son's finger still pointing at her in every newspaper in the realm, that she could lose to a lance sergeant. She had never in her life been in a room she could not manage, and she came into court 1 on the 6th day in dove gray, entirely composed, and took the oath in a clear, carrying, pleasant voice, and I watched Inez Dre's hands go very still on the lectern, the way a good marksman's hands go still. Vaughan took her through it in an hour. She was excellent. She had no head for figures. She had been a patron only, a figurehead opening bazaars. She had signed nothing and decided nothing. She had trusted Sir Holly's grain, as everyone had. And as for Renfell, the pictures had hung there for generations, and she had assumed that the arrangements her advisers made were proper. It was a very good performance. If she had stopped there, I think she might have got a divided judgment. Inez Dre stood up. 11 months of work, 406 answered questions, 1,100 pages of trial bundle, and she came to her feet with a single sheet of paper and a manner so mild that the press gallery visibly relaxed. Ma'am, she said, you say you are only the patron. That is what I was. A patron has no power over the fund's money. None at all. You never read the deed. I am not a lawyer, Miss Dre. No, said Inez, nor am I much of one yet, but I should like to read you something. And she read out Clause 9, all of it. The right of the color in an old man's copperplate in a room where 400 people were holding their breath. Against any person whatsoever who shall have taken it, whether he be a trustee, a warden, a patron, or a prince asterisk. She lowered the page. Have you heard those words before, ma'am? I don't believe so. Ma'am, 4 years ago, a memorandum was prepared by the consort's office and circulated to 3 people. Its subject was the constitution of the Old Colors Fund and the exposure of the patron. Its author is your private secretary. It is at tab 401 of the bundle. Inez turned her 1 page over. It quotes Clause 9 in full, ma'am, and then it recommends, and I read the recommendation exactly as it is written, that steps be considered to place the original deed beyond convenient reach. There was a sound in court one like a room full of people being hit. Sir Pelin Vaughan was on his feet, so a half-second later was the second silk. Rook waved them both down without looking at them. "Ma'am," said Inez Dre, and her voice had not risen a single note, 11 months ago that deed was lodged in the strongroom of this court. 4 days before this trial it was gone, and a forged copy without Clause 9 was in its place. I do not ask you who took it. I ask you one question only." She set the page down. "Who told you that Clause 9 existed?" And the Queen Consort of Eldermoor opened her mouth, and stopped, and looked in front of 400 people and the whole listening realm, like a woman standing on a step that was not there. "I do not recall the memorandum." "You do not deny receiving it." "I receive a great many papers." "Ma'am," said Inez Dre, with the very greatest respect, "that is the Crown Prince's defense. It cannot also be yours. He signed at a ribbon in a folder your office prepared." "You are the office." "That is an outrageous." "It is a question of fact," said Inez, "and I will put the fact. Between the memorandum and today, the fund lost 101 million crowns. The paintings did not move. The roof was built. Your son took the fees. Your household took the disbursements. And the one document in the realm that let a guardsman come to court about it was removed from a locked room in the king's own building." She stopped. "You say you were a figurehead, ma'am. Figureheads do not know which clause to steal." Morwenna did not answer for 11 seconds. Then she said the thing that ended her, and she said it not to Inez Dre but out into the body of the court, at the rows of men in civilian coats, in a voice that had finally slipped its moorings. "They are asterisk soldiers," she said. "They are paid. They stand in the road and they are given a wage and a pension and a bed, and this is the pension, and it is administered as everything is administered by people who understand money. And if a little of it goes to the maintenance of the house they serve, then that is not a asterisk theft asterisk. It is." She stopped herself. It was too late. It had been too late from the word asterisk paid asterisk. Sir Pelin Vaughan had his eyes closed. "It is what, ma'am?" said Inez Dre. "It is," said the Queen Consort, "how it has always been done." Rook did not reserve judgment. He sat until 9 that night with his clerk, and at 10 the next morning, in a court one so full that they put loudspeakers in the corridor and men climbed the railings outside to listen at the windows. He read out 94 pages, and it took him 5 hours. "I will give you the parts the realm remembers. On the arithmetic, the plaintiff's schedule is accepted in its entirety. I have checked it. It is right. It was compiled over 19 months by a serving soldier working from public documents, without assistance, without funds, and without a single unlawful act. I have rarely seen better forensic accounting, and I have never seen it done at a kitchen table. On the patron, the defendant says a patron holds nothing and therefore owes nothing. That is not the law, and it is not common sense. A person who takes control of a fund is a trustee of it, whatever title she prints on her notepaper. She controlled the appointments. She controlled the office that produced the papers. She controlled the folder that carried the prince's ribbon. She took the benefit. She was a trustee in all but the word. On the missing deed, the forgery removed one clause, the clause that permits a guardsman to sue, and nothing else. Whoever did this was not stealing a deed. He was stealing a door. And on the man, he was offered 100 million crowns for the beneficiaries, his rank restored, his record cleared, his mother's house returned, on condition only that this record be sealed. He put that offer to the widows, and they refused it, and he has therefore stood here for 6 days at the risk of his liberty and everything he owns, so that a fact should be said out loud in a public room. I am not often asked to admire anybody. I find that I admire him. Judgment for the plaintiff. 100 million crowns, to be paid into the Old Colors Fund and to no other person. Interest, a further 11 million. the assets of the Ardent Rise, of Kestrel Holdings, of Vellum and Crane, and of Renfell House frozen that afternoon and charged to the fund, the plaintiff's costs on the highest scale, and the papers referred to the attorney of the realm, with a note inviting him to consider the offenses of fraud, of forgery, and of perverting the course of justice. Corwin Ash did not take 1 crown of it. He asked for the costs to go to Anise Dre and for the rest to go to the fund, and when Rook asked him whether there was anything at all the court could do for him personally, he stood up in his father's suit and said, "My lord, I'd like the roll read." They read it on the last afternoon. Rook had the doors of court 1 opened, and the windows opened so the crowd in the square could hear, and the registrar brought in the roll of the Old Colors Fund, which is the list of every guardsman for whom it has ever paid, 3,140 names, 91 years of them, and beside each name the name of the widow it was supposed to keep. The court read them out, not the ushers. The court. Rook read the first 100 himself in his dry, careful, unlovable voice, and then he gave the book to the registrar, and the registrar to the clerks, and the clerks to whoever would take it, and it went round that room for 4 hours and 40 minutes, and the last 400 names were read by widows. Hesper Callow read her husband's. Marian Ash read her husband's, standing up out of a wheeled chair to do it, and her son stood beside her with his hands at his sides and did not move and did not blink, because he was, after all, a doorman, and because it was the last thing he could do for his father, and he did it right. And in the 4th row of the public gallery, in a gray coat, having queued in the square since 6 o'clock in the morning like anybody else, having taken the seat an usher gave him because it was the next seat free, sat the king. Alaric of Harrogate had not been asked to come and could not have been asked. A king does not attend a trial. He cannot, because everything in that room is done in his name, and his presence in it would be a thumb on the scale. So he had waited until the judgment was given and the case was over and the room belonged to nobody, and then he had come, alone, and sat where anyone may sit. When they began to read the roll, he stood up. He stood for 4 hours and 40 minutes. He was 68 years old. Twice an usher brought him a chair and twice he sent it back, and when the last name had been read, Guardsman Corwin Ash, his widow Marian, he was still on his feet at the back of the gallery, and he stayed there until the room had emptied, and then he went home. He did not make a speech. He never has about any of it. But a warrant went out from the palace that evening under his hand, and it was very short, and it did 4 things. It revoked every patronage, office, and appointment held by the Queen Consort. It removed the consort's office from the household establishment and dissolved it. It directed that no paper should ever again be brought to any member of the royal house for signature except unsealed, unribboned, and read aloud. And it restored Lance Sergeant Corwin Ash to duty, with full pay for 13 months, effective from the date of his suspension. The rest is quickly told, and most of it you know. Renfell was sold. The 41 paintings came off the wall of the long gallery and were sold, and the miniatures, and the tapestries of the Marrow School, attributed asterisk, which fetched 9,000 crowns and had cost the widows 14 million. The fund was made whole in 8 months. Every pension went back to the old rate, back paid 11 years, and the first payment went out on a Friday, and there is a photograph of Mrs. Callow buying a stove. Lord Cassius was tried, convicted of fraud, and went to prison for 9 years. Sir Holly's grain came home from abroad in the end, because he ran out of abroad and got 7. A clerk of the consort's office was convicted of the forgery and of the theft from the strongroom, and would not say who had asked him to do it, and got 4. The Queen Consort of Eldermoor was never tried. The attorney took 19 months over it and concluded, in a report that was published in full and satisfied nobody, that the criminal standard could not be met on the intent, that the woman had built a machine and never once put her own hand into it, and that the men who worked the machine would not speak. So she was not convicted of anything. She was only finished. She lives, I am told, in a house on the northern coast and does not go out, and the realm does not think about her. The judgment is what the realm has instead of a conviction. 94 pages, in the law reports, in every library, saying in the driest possible language exactly what she did forever. Corwin Ash said once, the only time he ever said anything to me about her, that it was enough. He said, I didn't want her in a cell. I wanted the widows to know they hadn't been unlucky. There's a difference between being poor and being robbed, madam, and they had a right to know which one they were. Inez Dre took silk 11 years later, which is very young, and is now the head of a set that keeps a card table in the clerk's room, unexplained, and refuses to be asked about it. Perrin Holloway gave the 40,000 crowns back and lives quietly and sleeps, he says, better. Sergeant Major Otho Quill died at 94 with the deed still on his knees, in a manner of speaking. He had kept the vellum through the whole trial and handed it back to the court on the last day, in the box, with a receipt, and then he asked for the receipt to be framed. It hangs in the depot chapel. The Crown Prince, the King, now, reads what he signs, and the folder no longer has ribbons in it, and every annual statement of the fund is read aloud in every guardroom in the realm on the day it is posted, by a serving guardsman, out loud, to men who are made to listen. And Corwin Ash went back to the gate. That is the part people cannot get over, and it is the part I understood at once. He was offered the wardenship of the fund and refused it. He was offered a commission and refused it. He was offered his pick of postings, and he asked to be sent back to the north gate at the palace, the same gate, the same 2-hour reliefs, and they sent him there. And on a cold Tuesday morning 9 weeks after the judgment, he came out of the guardhouse with his rifle at the order and took up his post in front of about 400 people who had come to watch, and stood perfectly still, and looked at what came through the gate. He did that for another 9 years, and then he retired on a full pension, out of a fund that could pay it. I saw him once more, years afterwards. I had left the registry by then. He was on the gate and I was on the pavement with a bag of shopping, an old woman among the tourists, and I stopped in front of him and I did not expect a thing, because he was on duty, and a man on duty does not know you. He did not move. He did not blink. His eyes went past me and stayed forward exactly as they should. And as I turned to go, he said, very quietly, without moving his lips at all, in the way the old hands can, Chancery 1188, madam. That was all. That is all it ever was. A number in a day book, stamped by a clerk who did her job on a wet morning when a man with wet boots and a purse full of other people's coins came to her window and asked her, without any expectation of being helped, to put his cause in the list. I put it in the list. The machine did the rest.